The wind pressed against the side of the truck as Nathan Brooks drove through the quiet outskirts of Millersburg, a small town carved into the edge of the hills. Spring hadn't arrived yet. The trees were bare, and the sky hung heavy with the gray stillness of late winter. Nathan's hands rested on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, mind somewhere else, somewhere much louder. His house stood alone on a gravel road, tucked behind a row of pines that swayed like tired sentinels. It wasn't large, just a single-story cabin with a porch and a fenced yard. The kind of place built for peace. But peace was never something Nathan had known how to live with. Not since the military. Not since he said goodbye to the uniform and the chaos that, strangely, made him feel useful. The silence had become unbearable. He'd been out of service for 9 months. No more sand, no more sweat-drenched gear, no more missions. Just coffee in the morning and the slow hum of days with nowhere to go. Friends had moved on. His family called less. At night, he sat on that porch staring out at nothing, hoping the wind might carry a voice back to him. It never did. That's why, on a Tuesday with no real plan, he drove to the county shelter. He didn't tell anyone. He just pulled into the cracked parking lot, stepped out of the truck, and walked through the doors like he had someplace to be. Inside, the air reeked of antiseptic and old fear. A tired volunteer gave him a clipboard. He didn't fill it out. He just asked, "You got any dogs that nobody wants?" The shelter manager, a stout man named Dean, raised an eyebrow. "We've got one," Dean said slowly. "But I'll tell you now, he's not easy. Came from a bad place. Doesn't let anyone near him." Nathan shrugged. "Show me." They walked past kennels lined with barking, whining, tail-wagging hopefuls. But there was one kennel at the end that was quiet. That silence pulled at Nathan's attention like a whisper. Inside, a large German shepherd stood still, eyes fixed forward. He didn't move. He didn't growl. He just watched. "That's him," Dean said. "Name's Kaiser. Won't eat unless no one's around. Growled at every staff member we've got. Honestly, he's a liability." Nathan didn't answer right away. He crouched a few feet from the bars, looking into those unreadable amber eyes. Something passed between them in that moment, something neither of them could name. "I'll take him," Nathan said. The paperwork took longer than Nathan expected. There were forms, waivers, conditions. Dean insisted on a full background check, which Nathan passed with ease. Former military. K-9 experience. Lived alone. No kids. No nonsense. Just a quiet man with a quiet house, looking to adopt the dog everyone else had given up on. They brought Kaiser out in a crate. No leash. No collar. Just a steel box and a warning to stand back. The handlers didn't speak to the dog as they carried him, just moved with silent urgency, as if afraid sound might trigger something. But Kaiser didn't snarl. He didn't struggle. He just sat inside the crate, eyes forward, as if he'd already accepted every mile of the road ahead. Nathan opened the tailgate and slid the crate in himself. He didn't speak to Kaiser, didn't try to coax him with treats or reach through the bars. He knew better. Some wounds weren't visible, and trust didn't come with a whistle. The drive home was silent. No music. No radio. Just the steady rhythm of tires against asphalt and the occasional creak wind groaning through the pines. Kaiser never made a sound. Not a whimper. Not a sigh. Nathan glanced at the rearview mirror once or twice, but those amber eyes never blinked, never moved. The dog looked carved from stone. When they pulled into the driveway, Nathan killed the engine and sat for a moment, fingers resting on the keys. The silence around him was complete, the kind that pressed in, dense and aching. He walked around to the back and opened the crate. Kaiser didn't move. His body was coiled tight, but not aggressive. More like a soldier waiting on an order that would never come. Nathan stepped back and left the door open. It took a full minute before Kaiser moved. One paw, then another, slow and measured. He stepped out like he was testing the earth. His head was low, ears twitching at every sound. He didn't growl. He didn't bolt. He walked past Nathan without a glance and headed straight for the porch. Nathan followed but said nothing. No commands. No expectations. When he opened the front door, Kaiser paused for a heartbeat, then walked inside. He made one slow circle through the living room, then settled near the wall, his back to everything. Nathan watched from the hallway. The dog didn't bark. Didn't whine. Didn't make a sound. A dog with no voice. But silence, Nathan thought, wasn't the same as peace. The night fell quietly over the hills, blanketing the house in shadows and stillness. Nathan moved through his usual routine: coffee left over from the afternoon, a sandwich he didn't really want, a few dishes rinsed and left to dry. He didn't check on Kaiser. Not directly. But he noticed the way the dog stayed pressed against the wall of the living room, eyes half-lidded but never fully closed. Nathan didn't try to pet him. Didn't call his name. The TV stayed off. The house was already too quiet. He left the back door cracked open in case Kaiser wanted air. The yard was fenced, no neighbors for miles. It was safe. As he walked down the hall to his bedroom, he could feel the weight of the dog's eyes on his back, not hostile, just watchful, as if assessing a battlefield. Sleep didn't come easy. Nathan lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, the overhead fan spinning slowly. He could hear the soft, almost imperceptible sound of claws tapping against the hardwood. Not pacing exactly, more like a slow patrol. Back and forth, one end of the hallway to the other. He remembered that sound from overseas. Boots shifting. Men on night watch, too tired to sit, too alert to rest. He didn't need to look to know where Kaiser was. The rhythm was steady, almost methodical. A few steps. A pause. A turn. Sometimes a brief stop near Nathan's door, then more footsteps. Always moving. Never resting. He lay there with one arm behind his head, listening. Eventually, he got up and walked to the door. He opened it quietly and saw Kaiser at the far end of the hall, standing still, facing away. The dog's head turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge Nathan's presence. Then, without a sound, he resumed his circuit. Nathan didn't say anything. He just stood there for a while, leaning against the frame, watching this creature who didn't sleep, didn't speak, and didn't seem to know how to stop. When morning came, Nathan rose to find Kaiser sitting by the back door, body still and eyes fixed on the trees outside. There was no sign of damage. No accidents. Just the faint imprint of paws along the floor and the echo of movement that never really stopped. Nathan poured himself coffee, black and bitter. As he took his first sip, Kaiser didn't move. He didn't beg. Didn't react. He just sat there, motionless. Not guarding. Not hiding. Waiting. The third day brought rain, steady, cold, and without apology. It tapped against the windows like soft knuckles and darkened the wood of the porch until it shone. Nathan liked the rain. It quieted the world even more than usual. But that afternoon, as thunder rolled in the distance and the sky sank into a deeper gray, something shifted. Kaiser vanished. He wasn't at the door. Not in the living room. Not in the yard. Nathan searched with calm, practiced movements, checking corners and rooms with the precision of someone used to walking into the unknown. He found him curled in the laundry room, wedged into the narrow space between the dryer and the wall. The light above flickered, casting faint shadows across the tile. Kaiser was trembling, his massive body drawn tight, head low, eyes wide. Not with aggression. With fear. Nathan stepped into the doorway and sat down slowly, back against the opposite wall. He didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He just watched. A loud crack of thunder rattled the glass. Kaiser flinched, pressing himself deeper into the corner, his ribs lifting and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. Then Nathan saw it. A patch of fur along Kaiser's side had shifted with his movement, revealing a jagged scar beneath. Faint but unmistakable, long and uneven, like it had been caused by wire or glass. The kind of wound that didn't come from a vet's scalpel. The kind that told a story no one had bothered to ask about. He didn't need details. He knew cruelty when he saw it. Nathan looked at Kaiser, studied the way the dog's ears stayed flat against his skull, how he made himself small, invisible. This wasn't the behavior of a fighter. It was the instinct of something that had survived more than it understood. "I get it," Nathan said quietly, voice almost drowned by the storm. "I've been there." He didn't expect a reaction, and he didn't get one. But the words hung in the air between them, simple and unforced. A recognition, not a comfort. That evening, once the rain had eased, Nathan called the shelter. He requested the full intake file. Said he needed everything they had on Kaiser. An hour later, his email pinged with a scanned report. He read through it twice, his jaw tightening with every line. Seized from a backyard. Malnourished. Covered in open wounds. Chained. No shelter. No food. 2 other dogs found on the property, one dead, the other near death. Kaiser had been labeled aggressive the moment they pulled him out, muzzle bloodied, not from his own injuries, but someone else's. They called him dangerous. Nathan closed the file and looked at the dog curled quietly on the floor beside his desk. "No," he whispered. "You're just hurt." The morning air was cool, the ground still damp from last night's rain. Nathan stepped onto the porch with his coffee steaming in his hand, the mist just starting to lift from the trees beyond the fence. Kaiser was already out there, sitting near the steps, ears perked, body still. But something was off. He hadn't touched his food. Hadn't moved from that spot since Nathan opened the back door. His amber eyes were locked beyond the yard, unmoving. Nathan followed his gaze. Across the dirt road, just beyond the tree line, a truck sat idle. Faded blue paint. Rust around the bumper. No movement, no license plate visible from the porch. Just, parked. Kaiser didn't growl, didn't bark. But Nathan could read his stance, shoulders squared, tail stiff, ears angled sharply forward. The dog was stone still, locked in a quiet readiness Nathan knew too well. Whoever was in that truck wasn't just passing by. Minutes passed. The truck didn't budge. Then, slowly, it rolled forward, tires crunching on gravel before disappearing down the road. Kaiser stayed frozen until it was gone. That afternoon, Nathan called the shelter. "Do you have any record of where Kaiser was seized from?" he asked. Dean's voice dropped. It was part of a sealed cruelty case. A guy named Maddox. Real piece of work. It didn't go to trial, but he's known to the local shelters. Nathan's gut tensed. He know where the dogs ended up? No idea, Dean replied. But if he saw Kaiser again, I wouldn't put it past him to come looking. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He moved Kaiser's bed to the foot of his own and double-checked every lock in the house. The revolver he kept in the drawer was loaded, placed gently back under the bed. Kaiser didn't pace that night. He didn't circle the house like he had before. He just lay there, head up, watching the hallway, the door, the windows. Waiting. The next day, Nathan worked on the back fence, repairing a loose panel near the west edge of the yard. The sun was out, birds chattered in the trees, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. Then he heard it. A sound he hadn't heard since bringing Kaiser home. Barking, sharp, furious, alive. Nathan dropped his tools and ran, heart pounding, boots slamming across the porch. He burst into the yard to find Kaiser at the gate, muscles tensed, voice roaring. A man stood outside, just on the other side of the fence. "That's my dog," the man shouted, face red with anger. "You have my damn dog." Kaiser didn't lunge. He just stood between the man and the house, holding the line. The man didn't back down. He stood at the fence, hands clenched, coat stained and eyes wild. Kaiser remained in place, unmoving, barking sharp bursts that echoed through the trees. Nathan stepped forward, standing beside the dog. "You need to leave." The man pointed, jabbing a finger toward Kaiser. "You don't know what he is. I trained that dog to protect. He's mine." Nathan's jaw tightened. "No. You used him. You broke him. He doesn't belong to you." The man's lip curled. "You think a few weeks makes you his owner? You're nothing." Kaiser stopped barking. He turned his head slightly and looked up at Nathan, his body pressed close, silent now, not in fear, but in something else. A question. A need for reassurance. Nathan reached down and placed his hand on Kaiser's shoulder. "You're not going anywhere," he said, not to the man, but to the dog. The man muttered something under his breath and walked away. The blue truck peeled off down the road, a cloud of dust curling behind it. Nathan knew this wasn't over. 2 days later, a letter arrived, official, sealed, stamped by the county clerk. A pet custody dispute had been filed. The man's name was Curtis Maddox, and he claimed Kaiser had been unlawfully adopted from the shelter. Attached to the claim was a photocopy of an old veterinary bill and a grainy photograph of Kaiser, younger, chained to a post. Nathan read the letter twice, then a third time. At the bottom, it stated, "Court hearing scheduled in 72 hours." He placed the paper on the table and looked over at Kaiser, who lay calmly on the rug, head resting on his paws. The dog didn't understand. But Nathan did. This wasn't just about keeping a pet. This was about saving a life. He picked up the phone and called Dean at the shelter. "They're moving forward," Nathan said. "He wants Kaiser back." "You've got to be kidding me," Dean muttered. "You need evidence. Real evidence." "I've been documenting everything," Nathan said. "Behavior patterns, recovery, bonding. But I need more. Something solid." "I know someone who might help," Dean replied. "Dr. Eliza Raymond. Behavioral expert. She's worked on cruelty cases before. I'll call her." The next morning, a silver SUV pulled into Nathan's driveway. A tall woman stepped out, clipboard under one arm, calm and composed. "You must be Nathan. I'm Dr. Raymond." Kaiser met her at the door. He didn't bark. He didn't back away. He stood still, watching. Dr. Raymond crouched but didn't reach for him. "May I observe?" Nathan nodded. Over the next hour, she watched as Kaiser moved through the house, relaxed, alert, stable. She saw him respond to Nathan's voice, lean into his hand, settle calmly at his feet. "He's not aggressive," she said, scribbling notes. "He's attached. Grounded. Safe." She closed her notebook. "You're not just his owner. You're his anchor." Nathan watched Kaiser sleeping by the fireplace, chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. They had 3 days. And everything to lose. The courtroom was small, just a few rows of wooden benches, pale walls washed in early morning light, and the steady hum of a ceiling fan that never seemed to stop spinning. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate. Heavy. Like everyone was waiting for something to break. Curtis Maddox sat at the petitioner's table, his blazer too loose across his shoulders, eyes darting around with barely concealed irritation. His lawyer, a local general practice attorney, flipped through a thin file of documents, vet records, the old photo, and a statement asserting prior ownership. Nathan sat across from them, posture calm but steady. Beside him, Dr. Eliza Raymond reviewed her final notes. She gave Nathan a small, reassuring nod, then glanced down at Kaiser, who lay stretched at Nathan's feet, his body relaxed, eyes half-lidded. He wore no leash. No muzzle. Just a simple black collar with his name. The judge entered, an older man with a thoughtful face and clear eyes. He called the hearing to order, then looked directly at Curtis's attorney. "My client seeks the return of his property," the lawyer began. "Mr. Maddox raised this dog, trained him, cared for him. We have documentation of prior medical expenses and photographic evidence that places the dog on Mr. Maddox's property. We contend that the animal was unlawfully adopted without proper notification to the original owner." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Maddox, how long did you wait before attempting to reclaim the dog?" Curtis shifted. "Didn't know where he was. Thought he ran off or got taken. Didn't think I'd see him again. And now? I saw him. Someone told me a dog that looked like mine was out near Millersburg. I checked. It was him." The judge turned to Nathan. "Mr. Brooks. Your response?" Nathan stood slowly, picking up the thick folder resting on the table. He approached the bench, handing over a series of photographs, Kaiser on the porch, resting by the fireplace, sleeping belly up beside Nathan's bed. He spoke simply, without drama. "This is Kaiser when I brought him home. He wouldn't eat if I was in the room. Wouldn't sleep. He paced every night. Never made a sound. Just waited." He passed another photo, Kaiser curled beside Nathan's feet, eyes closed. "This is 3 weeks later." Dr. Raymond stood next. "Your Honor, I've evaluated the dog in question. He displays no signs of aggression. In fact, he shows restraint, emotional connection, and behavioral healing consistent with a stable, nurturing environment. Relocating him could trigger regression and trauma." Curtis's lawyer objected. "Speculation. Professional assessment," the judge said flatly. "Overruled." Then he did something unexpected. He looked directly at Kaiser. "Mr. Brooks, would you bring the dog forward?" Nathan nodded once and gave a soft, "Let's go." Kaiser rose and followed, smooth and calm. No tension. No hesitation. At the center of the courtroom, Nathan stopped. "Stay." Kaiser sat. The judge looked at Curtis. "Mr. Maddox, you say he's yours. What happens if you call him now?" Curtis stood, hesitated, then snapped his fingers. "Come here, boy." Kaiser didn't move. Curtis took a step forward. Kaiser's body shifted. Not back. Not away. Forward. His ears perked, head raised, eyes locked on Curtis, not with affection. With awareness. With warning. Curtis stopped mid-step. The judge let the silence settle before speaking. "This court finds that the best interest of the animal lies in remaining with Mr. Nathan Brooks. The petition for reclamation is denied. Legal ownership is confirmed and permanent." Curtis turned without a word and left the room. Nathan knelt beside Kaiser. "We're going home." A week passed, and peace settled over Nathan's home like a soft blanket. No more trucks at the gate. No more letters. No more late-night pacing. Kaiser slept belly up most nights now, completely at ease, a position that made Nathan smile every time he saw it. Each morning, they followed the same routine. Coffee on the porch. A slow walk through the wooded trail behind the house. No commands needed. Kaiser walked beside him, step for step, as if the leash had always been invisible. That Thursday, Nathan decided to take him into town for a walk around the lake trail near the diner. It was a rare sunny day, and the air carried the smell of blooming pine and fresh earth. As they strolled along the gravel path, people smiled as they passed, drawn in not by fear, but by Kaiser's quiet dignity. "Beautiful dog," someone said. "Strong-looking fella," another added. Nathan nodded, offering a polite thank you, but didn't linger in conversation. Kaiser was alert but relaxed, tail swaying low behind him. It was the kind of ease you didn't see in dogs who were afraid. Then, halfway around the trail, everything changed. Kaiser froze. Not from panic. Not from threat. From recognition. Nathan followed his line of sight. Across the lot, near a parked hatchback, a woman was fumbling with her keys. She looked up. Her eyes met Kaiser's. And she dropped her keys. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears already streaming before she took a single step forward. Nathan instinctively moved closer to Kaiser, unsure of what this was. Then the woman whispered, almost too softly to hear, "His name's not Kaiser." Nathan blinked. "I'm sorry." She took a cautious step closer. "His name was Bravo. I helped rescue him years ago." She pulled out her phone, trembling fingers scrolling through photos. Then she turned the screen around. It was him. Younger. Thinner. Dirty. But unmistakably Kaiser, only then he was Bravo. Chained to a splintered post, ribs showing, ears flattened in fear. "I was with the rescue group that got those dogs out of Maddox's yard," she said. 3 of them. "We were supposed to transport them that day, but Bravo disappeared before we could. We thought he'd been sold. Or worse." Kaiser stepped forward and sniffed her hand. Slowly, deliberately, he licked her fingers once. Then he turned and walked back to Nathan's side. The woman smiled through tears. "He remembers. But he's made his choice." Nathan looked down at him. "Bravo, huh?" Kaiser's ears twitched at the sound, but he didn't move. "He's your chance now," the woman said softly. "And you're his." Later that night, Nathan sat on the porch as the sun slipped behind the trees. Kaiser, Bravo, rested beside him, head on Nathan's boot. "I don't care what name you came with," Nathan whispered. "You're home now." And Kaiser let out a long, contented sigh. The porch was quiet, bathed in the soft orange glow of a fading sunset. Nathan sat back in his old wooden chair, coffee mug in hand though it had long gone cold. Beside him, Kaiser stretched out on his side, completely still except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. Every so often, his paw twitched in a dream, and a soft grunt escaped his throat. Nathan smiled. It hadn't always been this way. He remembered that first night, the silence that felt like tension, not comfort. The way Kaiser had patrolled the house like a soldier. The way he'd never made a sound. Always alert. Always waiting. Not for a command, but for something worse. Something expected. He remembered the scar, the trembling during thunderstorms, the stillness that looked like strength but came from fear. But now? Now the silence was something different. It was rest. It was safety. It was trust. People had called Kaiser aggressive. Dangerous. Unadoptable. But what they really meant was, they didn't understand him. And maybe they didn't try. But Nathan had. And in doing so, he found something he hadn't known he was looking for. Not just a dog. A companion. A protector. A reminder that healing takes time, but it's possible. He looked down at Kaiser, who opened one eye at the movement and gave a low, relaxed exhale, tail thumping softly against the porch boards. "You're not broken," Nathan whispered. "You never were." Then, quietly, as if speaking to anyone who might one day sit where he sat now, he added, "Not every dog is born aggressive. Some are just made afraid. And some just need to be trusted again." Kaiser blinked once, then laid his head back down on Nathan's boot. The sky darkened. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. There were no trucks at the gate, no knocks at the door, no voices demanding ownership. Just the sound of wind through leaves and a man sitting with the dog he refused to give up on. Their journey hadn't been simple. But it had been worth it. And if you've made it this far, if this story touched something in you, reminded you of the power of second chances, or made you believe in the quiet strength of trust, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel. Like the video. Share it with someone who might need to hear this story today. Because sometimes the ones we call dangerous are just waiting for someone to see who they really are. And when we choose to believe in them, they believe in us, too.